Today I want to talk about coming to terms with Islam today. The DNC rules and Minnesota DFL constitutions provide for quotas, goals for Muslims. Donald Trump and Ben Carson have been discussing some of the problems surrounding the issue. As I see it, is that two of the candidates, at least two of the GOP frontrunners, both outsiders, Huckabee has not yet addressed this, have taken this on. And I'm talking about Carson. He's come out being asked and made the very clear point, and I want to say most people are not yet familiar with the issues about the legal system which would replace the U.S. Constitution. There have been actions all around the country in states and localities, very often viewed as a kind of overreaction. But as one gets close to the presence of a totally alien legal system trying to assert authority over Americans, as you've seen with Barack Obama, you begin to see what is at stake here. And so Carson told NBC's Meet the Press that he did not believe that Islam, because of Sharia law being incompatible with the U.S. Constitution, and anybody who's actually seen that will know this is true, that he did not believe it was compatible with the Constitution. Therefore, he would not advocate for, as he said it, to put a Muslim in charge of the United States in 2016. Now, I know there's a lot of people who would love to do that, so I know it's a big issue, but we have to look at it through the context of a United States democratic election and democratic institution that we need to preserve here in the United States. And so I believe that this refusal to submit to, if you will, the U.S. Constitution, to put one's own religious law above the Constitution, I believe that that is what these terrorist attacks around the United States actually mean. They are really the ultimate expression of a refusal to submit to the U.S. Constitution, because they, the promoters of the supremacy of Sharia law in the United States, will not yield their own religious legal system to that. Now, this system is very similar to the Old Testament. It includes quite a few of the harsh penalties for disobedience of the religious commands, and it's something that did hang around in Europe. We refer to this as medieval, the medieval time when towns might punish people in stocks in the public square or other kinds of severe physical things. You had people burning people of the wrong religion alive, beheadings, yes, the guillotine. We now consider this savagery and barbarity, and we replaced it with a system of laws which is not entirely secular, but which has moved more to the New Testament, as if civilization itself has been liberated or redeemed from these kinds of harsh and brutal actions in the name of law. We still have capital punishment in most states, and that perhaps is a remnant of these past practices, but it is carefully guarded by legal protections, and really, except for murders, you're not going to get capital punishment. There have been very few exceptions. And so to the Muslims, it must seem very strange coming into this country and having somebody which frankly you view as the infidel or the enemy and trying to adapt to our legal system. And most people from this religion are going to view the United States as uncivilized and immoral. And so they want to stick with Sharia law. And what Carson said was that it is not consistent with the Constitution. Obviously, it's not consistent with the Constitution, and therefore he personally would not advocate putting in a Muslim for president in 2016. Well, of course, there were some outcries, but what there has been is a great deal of misrepresentation of his statement that he was banning Muslims or wanted to violate Article 6 of the Constitution, which says no religious test, but he is not proposing a religious test. And obviously him expressing his opinion is no kind of religious test. That's just his opinion, and he's perfectly entitled to it. And now we've got CARE coming on and saying he should be blocked from running. He should be removed from the ballot. And I have responded to CARE directly on Twitter and said that in this country, you do not tell people who can run and who your followers must vote for and who cannot run because you are an imam. That is not America. He is free to express his opinion. It's valuable. And I happen to think it's right for 2016. And he's allowed to run. And this is in the hands of the voters. If the voters can't understand what he's saying, or they do understand and they object to it, then they can vote for somebody else. And so what we have here is a mix of cultures, where one culture is very authoritarian, has never had any democratic government in any of their countries. They all exist under a dictatorship, or a military leader, or under a theocracy, which is very often intertwined with their military people. And they don't believe in and don't understand free speech or democratic elections. So their first reaction, encouraged by the Democrats, has been to call for the removal of their opponent from the ballot, which of course is not going to happen. It remains to be seen how the polls are going to help either Carson or Trump. Now, as far as Trump, his thing, which was the big thing also involving Muslims, is that somebody suggested that Obama is a Muslim. And obviously he is a Muslim. However, there is no litmus test or religious test. And so a Muslim was allowed to be put in surreptitiously by the Democrats. So again, the quotas come up. Because there is a quota for Muslims in the democratic rules. When they're selecting delegates to elect the President of the United States, to elect any office that gets nominations as the means of getting on the general election ballot primarily. And there are some nonpartisan offices, but almost every office has this quota. Now, Muslims are not the largest quota group. So that, given that you're not the largest quota group, well, women are. Let me talk about women. If women voted as a bloc, as they do on many issues, just as the Democrats vote as a bloc on many issues, talking about women in the Democratic Party, women could totally decide every issue in the Democratic Party through these quotas. And through determining every issue in the Democratic Party, they can seize congressional seats, can seize all kinds of seats, and make their gender-based will the law of the land. And that is what they're trying to do in the case of Hillary Clinton. But what about groups like the Muslims, or like minorities here in Minnesota, who, and of course the states differ. Some states talk about the relative number among Democrats. And the way the Democratic Party works, as I reported to the Supreme Court in a case I believe is pending there, the bigger the group, the more powerful is your voice in selecting the President of the United States. The vote is not based on an individual right, one man, one vote, or anything like that. This is a group vote. And I just want to be real clear here. I'm reading from the DNC Democratic National Convention, Democratic National Committee 2016 rules right here, directly quoting them. And they say that there have been, quote, discriminatory and exclusionary practices with the intended effect of denying them voting rights for these groups. And that in recognition of this past history of discriminatory denial of the franchise, and in order to encourage full participation by all Democrats in the delegate selection process and in all party affairs, the national and state Democratic parties, so this is in every state, 50 states, probably plus the District of Columbia, they shall adopt and implement affirmative action programs with specific goals and timetables. Now they explain in these national rules, which have the force of law, that the goal of such affirmative action shall be to achieve participation in the delegate selection process and in party organizations at all levels, so we're talking about delegates here, by the aforementioned groups as indicated by their presence in the Democratic electorate. So they're not looking at the state here, the whole state. So they have a game. If you collect more of this or that group in the Democrats as a whole, you get more reserved delegates. Now, this is not democracy. So they're ruining democracy right here. At the same time, we need to have a democratic discussion and a democratic form of government, a Republican form of government, in which we elect our representatives in a democratic way. So, for instance, if 70% of the Democrat voters were women, they would need 70% of the delegates. Totally unconstitutional, because they're putting a presidential candidate or Senate candidate or House candidate on the ballot. And so they guard themselves by promising, they write this goal shall not be accomplished either directly or indirectly by the party's impositions of mandatory quotas at any level of the delegate selection process or in any party affairs. But it is so obvious that this is an illegal quota for women, pushing people like Hillary Clinton by directly determining which sex is going to be doing the voting, and thereby abridging and denying the voting rights of the excluded gender, violating the U.S. Constitution in its 19th Amendment that the Democrats in their rules for next summer in their convention have declared in advance that, notwithstanding this paragraph above, that equal division at any level of delegate, that's voting delegates, or committee positions between delegate men and delegate women, or committee men and committee women, shall not constitute a violation of any provision thereof, or of the United States Constitution, I suppose. Obviously it does. When you abridge and deny the voting rights of people based on sex in order to select your president or your senators or your representatives or anything like that, that violates the Constitution, because it's one man, one vote. Oh, because they say so. And I've asked the Supreme Court in a petition recently filed, and the U.S. Senate, which this also goes to find that this is indeed a quota violation. So there is enormous pressure to become a united bloc for Muslims or any other group that is empowered by the democratic rules. Now, Carson has come out and said, under Islamic law, homosexuals, men and women alike, must be killed. That sounds harsh. Women must be subservient, and people following other religions must be killed. I know that this is Carson saying, I know that there are many peaceful Muslims who do not adhere to these beliefs, but until these tenets are fully renounced, I cannot advocate any Muslim candidate for president. And this is Carson. Now, I view this as a political move by Carson, trying to identify himself with liberals, to get homosexuals, women, and these other groups, the Democrats, in power with quotas in elections on his side. But the problem you get into there is the secular Muslims, like Obama, tend to trample religious liberty, the Christians, and whoever else wants to stand up and express a moral faith. So there is this very live debate about what will be the impact of Muslims on American politics and the risk involved. And of course, that in the Democratic Party, it's controlled by women who block the votes of men unconstitutionally. So what about the Muslim leverage as a quoted group within the National Democratic Party, as part of the Democrat socially and politically engineered sub-party of this huge national party? So then you have your women's sub-party, you have your black sub-party, Hispanic sub-party, homosexual sub-party. So all these people get to control the agenda, the television show, and ultimately the election. And this is how we've got where we are in 2015. And we're trying to restore what we're trying to restore, democracy. It has nothing to do with race. We want to go back to the Constitution and the presence now of a potentially dangerous voting group who has insisted they're going to take over the White House. That is something that I think the Supreme Court and all of us need to look at. And so what is going to be the leverage? Well, as you already see, there's a powerful voice that the Muslim group speaks with. It's immediately all over the national media that Carson should be removed just because he would not advocate to select a Muslim for president. And that the congressional races, he said, that would be different because obviously the power is more limited, so he wouldn't object to that. Now, that doesn't mean he's banning Muslims, but that's his point of view. Now, many people have observed that Obama, whether he's a Muslim or whether he just looks and acts like one, has shown how destructive a single individual unwisely installed in that office, they can wreak havoc on America, its foreign policy, its national security, its economy, its morals, its safety and security. And he's already linked himself as if there's a single growing movement, a movement that involves many groups, and a movement that now includes these Muslim extremists, because CARE is not linked only with so-called moderate Muslims. They're linked with the terrorists, with all kinds of leaders. Religious leaders of the Muslims are involved, basically competing for radical leadership. Now I want to ask right out front, where is the competition for the moderate Muslim leadership? Are they silent? Where is it? And I will hypothesize that they can't come out and address these issues because they would be targets of Muslim extremists right here in America. And so a candidate for president, when asked or led to this question, because Carson volunteered his idea when he was asked whether he thought Islam was consistent with the U.S. Constitution. He said what must be said in 2016, good judgment and concern for the United States and its Constitution require, and its welfare requires this answer right now. It's not about whether you're a constitutionalist or not, like Ted Cruz was talking about. It is about, is America safe? This is a high purpose of the U.S. Constitution that you may not disregard if you are running for president. Now, if we could have separate elections, maybe they'd be milder. But their pattern has been that the extremists go forward and attack people perceived as outsiders of their group. Now they've got this Sharia issue, and now they've got the issue of the refugees. And the refugees issue has also come to the fore. And it makes it a very, very sensitive issue of religion, because really the idea of installing a Muslim in the White House, which, by the way, all these groups have been swearing they will do, okay? And so we don't want that threat or that promise to be aided by quotas, voting quotas, by political and social engineering in the Democratic Party. And they're also attacking free speech, and they've threatened Obama, because Muslims do that. They threaten other Muslims, and they've created this terrible situation in which really a number of countries have concluded that Muslims are threatening the character, moral, and political foundation of all of Europe. Now, it's not going to happen in Russia, but all of Europe is subject to this. So this is a very big deal, and this is another immigration issue. But I'm going to keep, for another video, updating my immigration position. So this refugee issue then comes in because, like the immigration issue, the Democrats appear to believe that all of these immigrants are going to flock to the Democratic Party because they will be dependent on the government, and the Democrats will be able to grow their machine, just like Chicago machine politics, or some of the corrupt political machines we've had in the past. And so they're trying to do the same thing with this issue, and one of the issues that comes up is, again, religion. Because whether Obama wants to admit it or not, religion is the primary criteria for what the Catholic Church is calling genocide in the Middle East. And not just Christianity or Kurds, but Christians and also Muslims are being targeted for genocide in this situation. If you're from the wrong Muslim sect, the favored method of conflict is genocide right now. And as vicious and savage and brutal as anything that goes back beyond the medieval times, in my opinion. And it is utter chaos, and one of the political issues is that Clinton herself and Obama and his crew have caused this in the Middle East. And now at this point, Putin is stepping in to shore up the regime of Assad in Syria, so that you don't have ISIL going into Damascus. Now there's broad agreement that this is not the outcome we want. And this has caused all Americans to take notice, except for those who are consumed in narcissism in their little daily TV shows and anchor desks, so-called when they're not even really anchors. There's been very few anchors in the television news history, actually. But they call themselves anchors, and a lot of those people are not paying attention to this. They're reading the teleprompter. And so now Russia is coming into it as a strong power, and it appears to be reasserting itself, although I don't believe they ever occupied Syria before. They've always had some ties with the Middle East, and a lot of their ties have been inimical, enemies. You can say that they've been involved in this conflict since many were enslaved. Russians were enslaved by the Muslims in the Ottoman Empire, which is the source of a great deal of slavery. So that all of this kind of thing is coming to a head, and Russia is in the mix. So meanwhile, we're doing nothing. Obama's policy is a joke. Now he's got someone trying to overthrow the Syrian government, which I predicted long ago Obama would try to do. Another stupid move of a man trying to use these savage barbarians to overthrow Assad, who happens to be in a kind of minority group himself. I think the Alawites are an ethnic minority, and they haven't gotten along well with some of the people in the region. I don't think they've gotten along well with Jordan, certainly have not got along well with Israel, and there's certainly a threat to Israel that is evident here. And part of Obama's foolish lack of leadership has been to oppose the Israeli leader, tried to engineer his defeat in the last Israeli election for going forward under the Democrats' very foolish Iran deal on nuclear weapons. Now, I believe they're at the point now where Obama is talking about implementing this deal, which there have been a number of triggers put in place, which we know he would never abide by because he's a completely dishonest individual. That's his primary trademark. And by the way, he's not a Christian, and Trump has said he's under no obligation to try to argue anything about Barack Obama. He is unfortunately in there because of the Democrats. And one of the reasons why we've seen this surge of independent voters, not only voter identification now, but now ferocious, really, political activism and attraction of high profile and articulate, not sophomoric as the rhinos charge, but articulate, high profile, and extremely competent. I'm thinking of Trump right now. But the independents are coming in because what's happened this year is we don't like this show. We've seen it before. Stupid Democrats versus stupid Republicans controlling the entire political system. If you want to know who are the stupid people that Trump was talking about, they are the establishment Republicans and the Democrats. The Democrats, they're all stupid. So by having these quotas and taking away our Constitution. So the people declaring independence, as it were, are overthrowing both of these two parties through their own political partisan mechanisms for choosing candidates. And these guys are trying everything they can to get out of the legal political process and to somehow get their own establishment people in, which is, in the Democrats' case, the wife of Bill Clinton, that is Hillary, and she's got all kinds of these women going crazy. And so you now have Carly Fiorina. I mean, she's going to have abortion up to, the final day? She's going to allow abortion, she just announced. But Carly Fiorina now on the Republican side is attracting some attention of women voters as well. There's a kind of a soap opera going on where she's getting beat up over the Hewlett-Packard and some of her poor leadership decisions there. But she is bringing it. She's bringing it with the Planned Parenthood assault, taking the position that we can go ahead and defund Planned Parenthood and push this thing in Obama's face and have Obama talk about why he likes to go around murdering innocent little fetuses and torturing them so that he can advance his own narcissistic self and his agenda, including Muslim resettlement and Muslim quotas. It's a good deal for him. But now the independents are bringing it. She's bringing it. Carly Fiorina is. Within about a week, we're going to see moves. We're going to see movement. There's already been a bill passed by the House. I believe it does defund Planned Parenthood. There's been a separate bill that's about the live abortion and murdering of the babies born alive. Now, I could see where that bill could be used as the battleground with the budget bill. I don't know how they're going to handle that. I don't know if John Boehner will stay on. They say they have 28 of 29 votes to remove him at any time. And then we'll see what actions the new House leadership takes if this actually happens. But Carly Fiorina pushing this certainly raises the profile of it, but it doesn't necessarily get into Congress itself. And they may have to remove the filibuster rule, which can be done with the majority in the Senate. Now, this is something Harry Reid introduced us to a decade ago, and they put it back. And I'm saying they're going to have to take it away, take that filibuster away. The thing is, they still will need to override an Obama veto, but they'll be able to take the procedural steps. We still have this Iran deal hanging around. And supposedly Obama's actions are limited there by some of these required triggers before he starts handing out the money to Iran. Now I'd like to close then with the issue about the Muslims and the refugees. So what we have is really a people over there who are killing off Christians. Christians can't get out. They get killed there, and these Muslims present themselves as if they're refugees. Now you look at them, and they're not refugees, they're soldiers. They look as strong as me, fresh, new, young, ready to fight. And really nothing else really going on for them. 72% are male. They're forcing their way in. They're threatening the local populations in Europe because some countries like Germany have said they will take them. Russia, no. Germany, yes. So this is the problem we face. Now, initial reports were that we're going to take 100,000 more refugees. It looks like for next year about 15,000 would come in. Now what I advocate is that let Europe take care of most of the local population. For us, we should be concerned about Christians who are being slaughtered by the majority. They're not a minority there, the Muslims. They're a majority. And I think that they're quickly trying to get to be the majority as they immigrate into the United States and team up with people who are burning up cities and attacking police. Obama, and this is his little army. Now, in our policy, we need to stop this and control it. So any Muslims that would be admitted, I believe, would have to be on a refugee status and screened as legitimate refugees and not just displaced persons. The same, because Christians are being randomly slaughtered under refugee status, they should be admitted, evacuated out of Syria in an operation not led by this feckless Obama, but real Americans who will fight back those who would pursue them and destroy them and their villages and take all their land and space. Then we must support the action of the international community to defeat these people. Now I realize that members of ISIS have been misled. They have been mistreated. They're bringing in sex slaves so that everybody's getting AIDS. They're dying of AIDS and can't get treatment. And they're not much good as a soldier once they get AIDS. They're being bombed from above, and their future is dim. And much of the military activity of ISIS has moved forward to forward operations of terrorism outside the main theater and into Europe, as I mentioned. It's just a matter of time. Now, I have never advocated that they be slaughtered from the air. I have always said there should be intelligent military use of the air power superiority. We rule the skies. Use that to round these people up and allow them to surrender. If they don't surrender, they continue to fight and kill them as an enemy in battle. This is what I believe the refugee situation is coming to. Slow this down. Provide camps for security for displaced people, and if necessary, as appropriate, find host countries for the displaced people, the refugees. Yes, we don't just want people who want cable TV. Internet is just fine. But where there are really refugees, we do need to show compassion by using the resources of the international community who will benefit greatly from stabilizing and rebuilding the region. And so much of what I believe the Muslim armies are trying to achieve can be achieved through international cooperation and fair and just application of our humanitarian and refugee policies, which we have used in the past. I've already seen comparisons that 800,000 people became refugees, maybe just to the U.S., from the Vietnam War. But this is not a contest where we try to win a side and get more Democrats and Republicans. This is a compassion-based humanitarian assistance and refugee status. And so just to conclude then, we do need to be concerned about people's religious beliefs. where those religious beliefs are connected with jihad and Sharia law. And so I agree with Dr. Carson's statement. Many, many people in the U.S. do. He didn't just come up with that, and the media knew it. This is a position that we have. We don't want Sharia law. This is a national policy. We do not want to exclude Muslims from running for any office, but when they run, they must win. And I mean, they must convince the voters that they are the most qualified and best represent the interest of the United States and our Constitution. We've come this far, maybe over 200 years, really 300 or 400 years in the development of our constitutional democracy, with our written Constitution and not just good ideas. And we want to continue. And we want to introduce, from a fair and balanced point of view, what that Constitution is, the liberties that it allows. Now, what's ironic is many observers know the liberties we do provide for religious exercise, the Free Exercise Clause, has allowed Muslims to come in and to have free exercise. It is true there's been some opposition from local communities who are rightly concerned about the use of Sharia law in disregard for the U.S. Constitution. There needs to be change, needs to be behavior change, attitude change by the immigrants. This is not Syria or Iraq. The U.S. has withdrawn from that conflict. I don't believe we should. I believe we should renew a status of forces agreement with Iraq. Obviously, if I was elected, I would do that. But that is not a military conflict which exists here in the U.S., and we will not allow it to exist here. What we will allow is full citizenship for those who abide by the law. On the basis of that, we need free and fair elections without quotas for Muslims or women or any kind of minority, just one man, one vote. That's not only the general elections, but beginning with those integral mechanisms of the free and fair elections in the precinct. That means in the precinct caucuses and abiding by the Constitution. Now, just at the end, the Democratic Party itself, in Article 2, this is the DFL Minnesota Constitution, subordination admits that they're subordinated to the U.S. Constitution, that they have to abide by the Constitution, that they will do nothing to violate it. But then they go into court and they say they're not bound by the Constitution. So this needs to be clear. The United States Supreme Court needs to take this case and needs to end these quotas so we can have free and fair elections again for everybody. I'm Steve Carlson, and I approve this message.